So this video is very much looking at the psychology of rehabilitation rather than the physicalness of doing exercises. And what I'm going to discuss today are what's called common thinking errors, common things that humans make mistakes with in terms of their thinking processes. And I'll be mentioning why some of these thinking errors can actually impact your stroke survivor and negatively affect the chances of a recovery. So I'll be discussing 5 common thinking errors that I believe should be understood and avoided by your stroke survivor. I'm Dr. Kenneth Monaghan. I'm a neuroplasticity expert and a rehabilitation specialist. I have an absolute passion for trying to develop your home as the ideal place to carry out your physical rehabilitation after you've had a stroke. If you've many of the points that I'm going to discuss today regarding thinking errors are discussed in the earlier chapters of my book Lights, Mirrors, Action. But if you really want a fantastic insight into these thinking errors, then the book The Art of Thinking Clearly by Ralph Dobelli is a fantastic read. And the simple instructions and the advice that are taken from the book and the simple thinking errors are going to be applied to your stroke survivor. And they're going to be used here and discussed about how to get them motivated to get the most from their programs. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but my own personal experience as a physical therapist over the last 32 years is that 80% of the success of my rehabilitation programs depends on the psychology of the interaction between myself and my stroke survivors and my patients, rather than the actual exercises that are carried out. So it's what the patient believes in me, believes in what I'm saying, believes in the potential of the success of their treatments. This is so important to achieving the outcomes that they desire. So our number one thinking error we're going to discuss, survivorship bias. There's a tendency as humans to focus on groups of people in society that have been successful in certain areas and to forget that, alongside the group that have been successful, there are probably 10, 100, 1,000 times more people in that same cohort that haven't been successful. So we focus on the successful group and we forget that behind that actually are lots of people who haven't been successful. And we can apply this to, stroke rehabilitation as well, because your stroke survivor and caregiver are likely to be looking on the internet and they're going to find all these success stories of these few people that have had successes and stroke recovery almost instantaneously over a short period of time. And your stroke survivor is going to feel deflated if they haven't received that type of recovery themselves. So it has to be explained to them that thousands of people are more likely to get a slow progressive recovery over a period of months rather than all this quick, definite recovery over a few weeks. Because if you believe that this quick recovery is going to happen and it doesn't, then you'll be very deflated as a stroke survivor yourself, and you'll feel very unmotivated to carry out the therapy that's necessary for you in your own home. The caregiver advice here about this point is very simple. You need to explain to your stroke survivor, the idea of this thinking error, survivorship bias, and explain to them that, recovery is generally slow, it's deliberate, but if you do the repetitions that we're talking about, thousands of repetitions, then you give yourself the best chance of recovery, and that is more likely to be the scenario for you as you're in your own home doing your physical program. Thinking error number 2, contrast effect. Again, as humans, we judge things sometimes to be either more beautiful, expensive, or large if we have something in contrast that's ugly, cheap, or small in front of us to compare with. So as humans, we have a problem with absolute judgments. And clothing stores often use this to their advantage because we go in and we see on the price tag, we see that the original price was $100 or €100, and now the price of this item is $50 or €50, and we think we're getting a great bargain. Whereas the $100 or the €100 is often not the actual real price of the product. So if your stroke survivor um, has attended a rehabilitation gym, a fancy outpatient setting, um, then they're going to be very aware of expensive equipment and medical style aesthetics that are in this particular place, and also allied health professionals in uniforms. And they may think then, in contrast to this, that their bedroom, their spare room, or their own homes with very simple equipment, that it's not fit for the purpose that it's set out for. And of course, the caregiver advice here is you have to explain to your stroke survivors that just because they're not in a fancy rehabilitation setting, they can still achieve everything they want by doing the repetitions, believing in their therapy, monitoring the progress that's happening to them. And this can happen in their own homes. And of course, I discussed in a previous video and also in my book, Lights, Mirrors, Actions, why your home has these tremendous advantages and why your home is a brilliant place to carry out a rehabilitation program after stroke. Thinking error number 3 is the chauffeur knowledge. Again, in society, and Ralph DeBally tells us very much in his book, there's 2 types of knowledge out there. There's number 1, there's real knowledge where there's evidence for it and it really is the true thing that we're reading. And then the second type of knowledge that's out there is very much the second-hand information that's passed, as gossip or kind of hearsay from different groups of people. And again, be very careful as a stroke survivor, as a caregiver, when you're looking for information to try and figure out what's the best recovery, what's the best programs to carry out at home, and make sure that it's real, beneficial medical knowledge that you're finding. And what the message I want to say to you today is that the best evidence that's out there are medical papers that are called systematic literature reviews. And I can assure you that all the information in Lights, Mirrors, Action comes from really good systematic literature reviews that are out there. Systematic literature reviews are the gold standard evidence that's available in medicine. And they tell us, and they are the absolute guide to whether medical treatments work or whether medical interventions have a chance, of achieving their goals. I'm going to direct you to one particularly brilliant site for systematic literature review evidence, and it's called the Cochrane Library, or www.cochrane.org, and that's spelled Cochrane. And the Cochrane.org website has been set up to try and teach people to find out whether different medicines or what works in medicine and what doesn't work. And the beautiful thing about the particular website is that when there's a summary of medical articles in Cochrane.org, they write the summaries as in medical language and also in non-medical language, so they're very easy to understand. So just be careful that the information you take when you're a little bit vulnerable as a stroke survivor, it comes from reliable sources. And the caregiver advice in this occasion is that, again, just make sure you get real knowledge when you're passing the information on to your stroke survivor. Don't take guidance from people who don't understand what systematic literature reviews are. And there's many from my experiences over the years who don't fully understand what systematic literature reviews are. And once again, as I've said, all of the evidence and all the information in Lights, Mirrors, Action comes from reliable systematic literature reviews that you can trust. Our thinking error number 4, the paradox of choice. Of course, nowadays, everybody is simply bombarded with loads of options. So we have hundreds of holiday destinations. We've got like hundreds of types of clothes, types of even flavors of ice cream, and lifestyles that we can choose from. And of course, naturally, we'd be thinking that the more choice we have, the better. But actually, in the long term, it's been proven that the more choice that we have, sometimes the less satisfied we are. And again, according to Ralph DeBally in the brilliant book that I've mentioned before, if you've too much choices, it can lead to the following. Number 1, it can lead to an inner paralysis inside you where you just can't make a choice because there's too many options available. Number 2 is, with so much choice, you make the wrong decision. You simply make the wrong decision, so it leads to a poor decision making. And number 3 is, overall, you end up very discontented because of the huge choice that you've had. And again, does this relate to stroke? It does. I've mentioned before in other videos that there's probably 20 to 30 different physical rehabilitation safe treatments that are out there for stroke survivors to use. And of course, the question is, which ones should you use? So for me in Lights, Mirrors, Action, I've purposely only included 6 therapies that I feel are cost effective, research driven, really innovative, but can be carried out very easily in your own home with very little, relatively inexpensive equipment. And as as a caregiver, can I ask you that you need to explain this to your stroke survivor that, even though there's only 6 therapies that are being used in Lights, Mirrors, Actions, they're all evidence based and they're purposefully kept to the minimum to reduce this decision fatigue that can happen in your stroke survivor. Ultimately, they potentially can end up more contented because of all of this. And they'll find out that this is absolutely true. And then finally, thinking error number 5, social loafing. There's a really interesting story in Ralph Debelly's chapter 33, where he tells us about a French engineer, Maximilien Ringelmann, who back in 1913 discovered that if you look at the power of 2 horses pulling a carriage or a coach, that the power of the 2 does not equal twice the power of one single horse. And you would imagine that it would. But on average, Ringelmann has worked out that if 2 individuals or 2 horses are pulling together, each one of them gives 93% of their individual strength at the time. If it's 3 horses pulling together, then it's reduced further to 85% of the individual strength. And when 8 horses pull together, it goes as low as 49% each one is pulling. And this term for this is called social loafing. And it's actually a very rational behavior in society, because why should you invest all of your energy to, when half of it will actually be enough if you're part of a team? So essentially, in lots of occasions, teams can be lazy, but they're lazy unconsciously. So they're not so familiar with their direct performance because it blends into the group or into the team. So they're just not aware of this. And where does this fit into stroke rehabilitation? Well, from my own experiences of working in rehabilitation, it's important, and it's likely that your stroke survivor will work much harder if they're by themselves. It also, if they're watching other people, it's possible that they'll focus on, the abilities that they've lost rather than the actual improvements that they're making. So this is another reason. But it's awfully important, that stroke survivors are able to prove and see proof of their own progress. And sometimes, when they're in an environment by themselves, they can focus on this a little bit better. All of this idea of measurements and how stroke survivors can prove to themselves and prove to their caregivers they're making progress is all described in chapter 9 of Lights, Mirrors, Actions. And the final caregiver advice on this occasion is that, explain to your stroke survivor that being by themselves, working hard in their own homes can be much more productive than from working in teams. Just make sure that you warn them not to focus on everything that they've lost in terms of function, but just to try to focus on the progress that they're making. They'll find this much more beneficial in the long term. And again, not a disadvantage to be working in your own home by yourself, because apparently you put more effort and more energy into what you're trying to achieve. So thank you very, very much for listening to this video once again. Please ask me in the comments, what areas that you'd like more information about, and I'll try and make those videos for you. Please also go to my website, lightsmirrorsaction.com, if you want to find some more extra resources that'll help you design this best physical rehabilitation program in your own house. You'll find workshops, newsletters, YouTube videos that'll all give you tons of practical advice and guidance. So thank you very, very, very much for listening.